Going live in 3, 2, 1, cue.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and welcome back to another season of Political Insights,
40 minutes of political knowledge.
As your host for this season, my name is Ilya Marsha.
And I'm Khairil Azmin. Stay tuned with us throughout this session as we delve and discuss about political issues and knowledge.
So, approaching our fourth week of CMCO here on campus, we hope that everyone is taking care of their health mentally and physically as well. So, Khairil, how have you been spending your days here on campus?
Oh, I'm on the campus as usual. University student, I need to finish my assignment, and I think I need to do more revision and study because when online learning, I have difficulties in understanding the lecture, maybe because of the connection and so on. So, how about you, Marsha?
So I've been trying to stay productive as well, juggling with my assignments and my studies, trying to stay productive. But don't worry, tonight we want you guys to stay productive as well, to share our knowledge about the current situation in Malaysia. So Haikal, will you do the honors of introducing our topic?
All right, Marsha. Today we will be talking about the Proclamation of Emergency that are trending a few days ago. And to know more about it, let us welcome and introduce our invited guest, Dr. Khairil Azmin. Assalamualaikum, Doctor.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullah. How are you, Masha and Aika?
Alhamdulillah. How are you,
Fine.
Doctor?
I'm doing fine as well. We are having class from work from home nowadays.
So Dr. Khairil Azmin is our very own constitutional law lecturer from the Ahmad Ibrahim Kuliah of Law. So he also did his PhD on constitutional law. So let's welcome him.
Okay, Doctor. For the first question, Marsha, I think that a lot of people really want to know what is the emergency. So, Doctor, what exactly the meaning of Proclamation of Emergency, and what are the factors or the causes that can bring us to the emergency situation?
Okay, all right. Thank you. It is a good question. First of all, we need to know what actually is emergency. Now, when we say we are in state of emergency, you are in a very extreme difficulties. You know, isn't it? They say that normally we are not in difficulties, but sometimes we face difficulties. But the difficulties that we face during ordinary time are not emergency difficulties. You know, they're difficult. Maybe you have problem, but it is not like grave and a very extreme hardship. When we use the term emergency, even literally, it refers to a situation where there is extreme hardship. It is a very difficult situation, extraordinary hardship. It is not ordinary hardship, but extraordinary hardships. Now let us take an example. You know, if let's say that we have problem relating to maybe raining, it's raining heavily, and then there's flood. That is difficulty that we face. But when let's say the whole country is flooded, that is extreme difficulties. That basically what emergency means. Now this is first of all, I think all of you know what is difficulties and emergency by now, but this you are talking about law. We are talking about constitutional law. So when we speak about law, there are some technical terms or legal words that we need to use. So when we say emergency, you are in difficulties or extreme hardship, that in law doesn't necessarily means we are in the state of emergency. Okay, so now we have to use, when we say emergency in law or in the constitution, it refers to a situation where there is a proclamation of emergency. So this, I think we need to understand. So even let's say you are facing extreme hardship, but there is no proclamation of emergency made by the Yang Tuan Agong, we, technically speaking or legally speaking, are not in the state of emergency. Why? Because there is no proclamation of emergency made by Yang Tuan Agong. Okay. Now, however, if let's say that there is no difficulties, we don't face any difficulties, but Yang Tuan Agong declare emergency or proclaim emergency, then we are in the state of emergency, even we don't feel that we are facing any hardship. Okay, so this brings to two situations. Okay, de facto and de jure. Now, de facto refers to in fact. De jure refers to in law. So it's either de facto emergency or de jure emergency. If it is de facto emergency, meaning that there's extreme hardship. If it is de jure emergency, meaning that in law there is state of emergency. So that you have to understand, because this is technical term. So when we say that in the state of emergency in law, it means there is a proclamation of emergency made by the Yang Tuan Agong under Article 150. But if there is no such proclamation, then there is no state of emergency. So I hope it will clarify the situation. All right. So now I think the second question, I think Haikal asked just now, is that what are the factors which cause proclamation of emergency? These are among the things that people ask, should or should not we declare emergency? Is it relevant or not? What actually is the situation? What happen if there is proclamation of emergency? Okay, first of all, if we look at other countries, in this world today, a lot of them declared emergency. Okay, some of them declared emergency at the beginning of COVID-19 pandemic. Some of them do not declare emergency. In Malaysia, we do not declare emergency. When the pandemic started in March 2019, sorry, 2020. It began in 2019 December, but it affected Malaysia in 2020, and then we started our conditional movement order in March 2020. The government did not declare emergency. Now the thing is, the World Health Organization or WHO had declared a health emergency. In other words, they basically recommend all countries to take emergency measure to contain the pandemic, which basically were spread over all over the world. But our government did not use emergency power. Instead, our government used ordinary law and ordinary power to contain a pandemic. Okay, so now actually the issue of whether we should use emergency power or not is subjective, because some countries declare emergency to deal with COVID-19. Some countries do not declare emergency to deal with COVID-19. So whether it should be declared or not, it depends on the situation of the country and depend on the government of the day in that country, whether they think that it is relevant or suitable to declare emergency or not. It is subjective. It depends on the government. It depends on the needs. Okay, now I think maybe if I can add some more, feel free to ask because feel free to ask. Now, is it necessary to declare emergency only when there is war? That is one of the questions. During when it comes to the word emergency, a lot of people thought there should be use of weapon, armed violence, subversion, internal disturbance. Well, the thing is not necessarily. Okay, why? Because no, the thing is our original in our constitution, originally it says that the grave emergency exists when there is a threat. When there is a threat to our security, economic life, or public order. So the word emergency actually is not clearly defined in the Constitution. Article 150 clause 1 of our Constitution only says a grave emergency exists whereby the security or the economic life or public order is threatened. So as long as the government or the authority believe there is a threat to security, economic life or public order, then there is justification to issue emergency. All right, so this coming back again to the issue is it is subjective matter. All right, so unlike our original provision, when we get independence, the original provision of our constitution says that emergency, the threat to security, economic life, exists due to war or external aggression or internal disturbance. So, in other words, when we get independence, the original provision of a constitution says if you want to declare emergency, is okay, but that must be due to war, external aggression. In other words, some other countries want to attack Malaysia, or internal disturbance like civil war. However, provision was amended in 1963. So as a result, any factor can be the reason to declare emergency. For instance, pandemic can be a reason to declare emergency. If there is a natural disaster like flood, there can be reason to declare emergency. Tsunami, earthquake, all over the country or many part of the country, all this can be reason to declare emergency. I think that is the idea of emergency in general.
Okay, thank you, doctor. So now we all understand what is emergency it is and the factors, even what anything happened, it was under the government to declare it is the emergency or not. Even
Yes,
in Malaysia, like pandemic situation, some people said we need an emergency, but some people not said not. But it is under the consideration of our government.
correct.
Yes.
Yes.
So there are also three factors that usually would want people to protect an emergency, such as the security, economic, and also public order. So, but I believe that all of us are curious. How will this proclamation of emergency affect the lives of the citizens?
Okay, so how does it affect? Well, basically, that depends on uh, what power used by the government during the state of emergency. Okay, all right. So here, first of all, why do you want to declare emergency? That's the first reason, Why do you want to declare emergency? Surely there's a reason, isn't it? If there is no reason to declare emergency, why there is a need to declare emergency? So that is the first question. Why emergency is declared? Emergency is declared in order to enable the authority to use extraordinary power under constitutional provision relating to emergency. That is Article 150. Okay, to use extraordinary power under Article 150. If there is no proclamation of emergency, the extraordinary power under Article 150 cannot be used. No, it cannot be used. So the extraordinary power under Article 150 may only be used if there is declaration of emergency or proclamation of emergency. Now, let me bring to another stage. What are those extraordinary power? Because basically, Marsha asked, will it affect the people, isn't it? What effect it has to the citizen? So the extraordinary power, okay? What are those extraordinary power which can be used by the government upon proclamation of emergency? The answer is the power is very wide and it is extraordinary. Now, some people may say that why so what the power which is so wide and extraordinary is given uh, to the government under Article 150 during emergency? The answer is to deal with extraordinary hardship. To deal with extraordinary hardship. Because if it is ordinary problems and difficulties, we have ordinary law to deal with. We can use ordinary power. Okay, but when it comes to extreme hardship, we need extra power. We need extreme law to deal with extreme hardship and extreme difficulties. So under Article 150, it gives extraordinary power to the government. Okay, now for that, we need to understand that there are two norms under the Constitution. All right? Under our Constitution, there are two norms. Number one, ordinary norms. Number two, extraordinary norms. Ordinary norms or value that applies to ordinary situation. Okay, under current situation, this is ordinary norms. We use ordinary law. But under extreme hardship, we use extraordinary power. So the power under Article 150 is extraordinary norms. All right. So under normal situation, the government can only make law which is consistent with the constitution. That's number one. The, so the parliament now cannot make law which infringe our rights. All right. However, under Article 150, especially Clause 5 of Article 150, by virtue of Article 150, that is extreme power under emergency, the Parliament or even the Yang Tuan Agong can promulgate law or emergency ordinance which takes away rights and liberties of the people. That is one situation. So here, emergency laws or ordinance will enable the authority to take away rights and liberties protected under the Constitution. All right? That's number one. Number two, our country practice federal system of government. Under the federal system of government, the government of the national government or federal government governs the whole country on certain subject matter, on some areas, while the state governments govern the state and they are given some autonomy. That is normal situation, normal ordinary norms. But during emergency, extraordinary situation, extraordinary norms, federal government or federal authority can use the power or take the power of the state. All right. So in other words, we are federal country. Emergency power allows this country to be administered as if it is a unitary country. So I'm taking to the extreme here. I'm taking to the extreme where it is possible for the federal authority to exercise power which under the constitution actually belong to the state. So the federal system can be turned into a unitary system of government. And the third aspect, which is not ordinary under emergency situation, is the executive can make law. This is, again, for those who studied doctrine separation of power, they know that under the doctrine, there are three organs of government and each organ exercises its own function. One organ can exercise function of others. So those three organs of government are the executive body, the legislative body, and the judiciary. So here, legislative body can make law, executive body cannot make law, but executive govern the country. However, during the state of emergency, the executive body, under the name of Agong, can proclaim emergency ordinance. So in other words, the federal executive authority may make law without the need to table it in parliament. So this is extraordinary, because it defies the doctrine of separation of power. So these are the three aspects during the state of emergency which have great implications to the life of the people. First, emergency law can be used to take away fundamental liberties and human rights which are protected under the Constitution. Number two, the country can be turned into unitary country. And number three, the executive body can make law which is against the idea of separation of power. But, okay, now I want to make a very big exception. But when emergency is proclaimed, it doesn't mean that all these things are going to happen. There is a big no. Okay, so these are the powers which are available for the authority to use. So the authority may decide not to use any of those powers at all. Now, in that situation, even there's enormous power can be used by the federal political authority, but since they decide not to use the power, then it doesn't affect the people. It doesn't affect the people. So whether emergency is going to affect the life of the people, it depends on the government and to what extent the government want to use emergency power. So it may be the government may want to use very little aspect of emergency power, So if it is being applied, then our right are still available. It's not being affected. The country is still a federal country, not unitary country, and there is separation of power in spite of the existence of emergency. Now this is what happened from 1963 up to 2011. You know, we were in the state of emergency for many decades, up to 2011. The thing is, a lot of people were born during emergency and maybe pass away during emergency before 2011, and they do not even know they were living in the state of emergency. You know why? Because emergency power was not invoked by the political authority. So the issue here is what kind of political emergency power that the government want to use. So if it is a government which cannot be trusted or have the history of being abusive or authoritarian, then there's a reason for us to worry. But if the government has a good track record and has not abused the power entrusted to them, which I believe this is the kind of government that we have today, so there is nothing for us to worry, because emergency power may only be used only for specific purpose, for the benefit of the people, to settle a certain problem which due to technical or legal problem cannot use ordinary norms.
So I guess
Yes.
in shorter words, we can say that grave emergency or emergency will only impact the lives of citizens based on how or what the situation is
Yeah.
and how the executive would want to execute their power. Right?
Correct.
I guess.
Yeah.
True, I
Oh,
agree with it. Okay.
I'm lucky if you have also done. I like both of you.
Okay, let us continue. From the start, we have discussed about proclamation of emergency. So now I think us and also we all of us would like to know how many times did Malaysia face the proclamation of emergency?
Oh, yeah, that is very interesting question. No? So one thing that a lot of people do not realize was Malaysia gained independence during the state of emergency. All of us know that we get independence in 1957. I think everybody knows. It is a common fact. But a lot of people do not know that 31st August 1957 was the time we were in the state of emergency. A lot of people do not realize. Now, so even when we get independence, we're already in the state of emergency. So this is emergency pre-independence. Who declared emergency during that time? The British Colonial Authority. Because during that time, we were under British direct and indirect rule. So in the 1948, the British declared the state of emergency. I think you know about the communist subversion, American armed violence and subversion, where a lot of our uh, police basically were killed and murdered by the communists due to this armed insurgency. So it continued 1948 until 1960. So in other words, when we get independence in 1957, we were in the state of emergency. Okay, but we don't count that in because it was before our independence, before we get independent. After independence, the first emergency was declared in 1963. Okay, now again, I would like to mention a few things about emergency. First of all, I think I've mentioned about extraordinary power of emergency. Emergency can be declared for the whole country or only certain area in the country. Okay, this is we ought to know. Okay, so in other words, they say that if the whole country are in extreme hardship, emergency can be proclaimed for the whole country. Okay, but if let's say in only certain area, for example, na'udzubillah, tapi this is just example, only in Gombak, in extreme hardship. So, emergency can be proclaimed only in Gombak. So, other areas are not in state of emergency, but only in Gombak. So, what is difference? between the declaration of emergency for the whole country and declaration only for Gombak. If emergency is declared for the whole country, emergency power can be used for the whole country. Okay, in any part of the country, because emergency declared for the whole country. But if emergency is declared only for Gombak, then emergency power can only be used in Gombak. Only in Gombak. So that is the difference. Now coming back to the earlier question, how many emergency that we had? Well, let us count together. The first one after independence is in 1963.
Yes.
Okay. Now I want to ask Marsha and Haikal, because I know you're both bright students. What happened in 1963 to our country?
The emergency in Sabah Sarawak, right, Marsha?
It's the one is in Sarawak,
Oh,
not
in
Sabah.
What happened in 1963? 1963.
Malaysia Day? You mean
Yes, very good. Yeah,
sorry.
16 September 1963. Malaysia was formed. Yeah, okay. Malaysia was formed. But unfortunately, Malaysia was formed in under some sort of difficulties. Okay, why? Because the Philippines were not happy. The Indonesians were also not happy. Okay, I think you know about the case about Philippines, isn't it? They're claiming, some part of country, but we are a sovereign nation, and Indonesia also were not happy. And they have Indonesia during that time have a very charismatic leader. Now, this leader is extremely charismatic, and he's so powerful because he has no difficulty. Why? Because his name is Sukarno. He doesn't face any difficulty because Sukarno. So he can do almost accomplish anything. So Sukarno is not happy with Malaysia because, as we know, Malaysia is formed when Sabah, Sarawak, and Singapore joined the country. And for Sukarno, that Malaysia, from we have Federation of Malaya 1997, we become Malaysia 1963. For Malaysia, for Sukarno, it's not a good thing. No? So Sukarno had initiated what they call confrontation. So we had confrontation with Indonesia due to Sukarno attitude towards the formation of Malaysia. So in order to deal with Indonesian confrontation, we declared emergency in 1963 for the whole country. Okay. Now, of course, this confrontation basically was short-lived because Sukarno was deposed and then replaced by Suharto. All right. Okay. So that is the first declaration of emergency. After 1963, we had another declaration of emergency. Now, this time happened in 1966, and that special for Sarawak. Okay. Now, for those who studied law, they will know the cases of Stephen Kalung-Ningkan. The Stephen Kalung-Ningkan saga, not Proton saga. There is a cases relating to Stephen Kalung-Ningkan. Why? Because Stephen Kalung-Ningkan was the chief minister of Sarawak, very charismatic leader, and was fighting for the right of Sarawak. Unfortunately, he was at loggerhead with the prime minister and federal government. Okay, which basically resulted Stephen Kalung-Ningkan to be removed from his position as chief minister by the Yang Dipertuan Negeri of Sarawak. But he went to court, and then the court declared that the removal of Stephen Kalung-Ningkan as chief minister was unconstitutional and invalid. It shows how Malaysian court were independent. So due to this, the federal government declared emergency in Sarawak, and the federal government had amended the Sarawak constitution to give power to the Yang Tun Negeri or governor to remove Stephen Kalung-Ningkan as chief minister. So in other words, we can see here, the emergency was proclaimed for Sarawak in 1966 due to political stalemate, political problem. And the power was used in order to remove the opponent of the government from office. So this basically is rather unfortunate because it seems that the power had been used for ulterior motive rather than a pure political or economic consideration or security condition. It seems that is for ulterior, just some political motive there. But we have to remember, the government said that, well, it is not all, because in Sarawak during that time there was communist insurgency. That's number one. Number two, Malaysia was just formed in 1963, and a lot of people were taking advantage and want to create disunity and problem between Sarawak and Malaysia. So the federal government have to make a drastic action in order to preserve the integrity of the nation, and finally have to make that decision. So whether it is wise or not, it is for us to decide. But Alhamdulillah, Sarawak is still with us. So we do not know. Maybe if that power was not used, we do not know. Maybe that state were no longer with us. You know that. If it is like being overcome by communist authority or people who have bad feeling towards Malaysia, then perhaps we will not be together today. So again, this is up for us to decide. That is the second proclamation of emergency for Sarawak. The third one, 3 years after proclamation in Sarawak, was proclamation in 1969. Now, this proclamation is for the whole country, and this one is very special. Why is it very special? Because this proclamation was made when there was no government. You see, in 1963, proclamation was made upon advice of the government of the day. In 1966, proclamation was made upon the advice of the government of the day. But in 1969, there was no government. How come there was no government? Because we are a democratic country. The answer was, it was declared immediately after general election in 1969. Election just finished, but the result has not come out completely. So parliament has not been summoned. There is no parliament. Definitely there is no government, because in Malaysia, our government or the executive body must come from the legislature. So we must first establish parliament, then we can have legislative body. But here, even the parliament was not summoned, and thus we do not know what's the result, when the result was coming. So emergency was proclaimed due to riots, due to racial matters in 1969. So if there is no government, who actually is advising the king to proclaim emergency? So this is why the idea or the opinion that emergency can be proclaimed by the Yang Tuan Agong in his discretion or as prerogative becomes very real, to deal with extreme hardship which is beyond our expectation, like what happened in 1969. Okay. After that 1969 proclamation for the whole country, we had another proclamation of emergency. Now, this is the last proclamation of emergency in 1977. But this proclamation of emergency in 1977 is special to the state of Cek City Wan Kembang. What? Yes. Anybody from Kelantan? No, okay. Maybe we have a lot of friends, you know. Okay, so what happened in Kelantan? Well, it's a long story which can be shortened. That again, political problem or stalemate. All right. Okay, so it is a story which involves dissatisfaction among coalition parties, you know, and then what happened was there is like motion of no confidence against the Menteri Besar, but the Menteri Besar did not resign, and then he was not removed. So basically, the government is not working. So as a result, to solve the problem, emergency was declared in Kelantan in 1977, and during that, when emergency ended, they make a general election, which resulted change of government. Okay, so in 1963, in 1966, in 1969, and 1977, So when we look at these 4 proclamations of emergency, then we understand, that emergency was proclaimed due to various reasons. And basically, all these proclamations, uh, for the proclamations were lifted in 2011. So you just imagine the period from 1969, 63 up to 2011 is a long time, isn't it? And a lot of people do not realize that they were living in the state of emergency until the Prime Minister in 2011 uh, tabled a motion in Parliament to annul all those proclamations. Okay, so that's a brief history of proclamation of emergency in Malaysia.
So Marsha, we have a few. So Marsha, now we know that Malaysia had faced a few of number that with number of emergency with different causes and different situation of emergency at that time a few years
Yes.
ago.
So
Mm-mm.
I see four official emergencies that we have
Yes,
proclaimed
four.
here in Malaysia. So I think we would all want to know what are the differences of the proclamation of emergency due to war or external aggression or maybe a pandemic. Do they have actually the classifications of each emergency, or is it like one whole emergency? Everything is an emergency.
Yeah. Okay. It is a good question because a lot of people were confused. Even in when we read newspaper, some people use this is a health emergency, and then some people say that this is uh, political emergency, and then a lot administrative emergency. Okay. When we look at the constitution only says emergency. There is no health emergency, economic emergency, administrative emergency. No. All these are words or terms created by people as they like. You know? So in law, when emergency is proclaimed, for whatever reason, it is a state of emergency. Okay, it is a state of emergency. So there is no such thing as when we declare emergency for health, this is going to happen. When we declare emergency due to administration, this is going to happen. No, emergency is proclaimed. That's it. It can be due to public order. It can be due to security. It can be because of economic reason. It can be because of political reason. It can be due to internal disturbance. It can be due to natural disaster, pandemic, whatever. It can be of any ground. But the consequence is just emergency. The only difference is what kind of power that the government would like to use. That is the only difference. If it is like health emergency, maybe the government is not going to use uh, power unnecessarily because there's no need to use it. Only perhaps to control people in a certain area, not to move around, whatever. So that is why we don't need to be too concerned about this term because emergency is applies to all, but what kind of power that depends on the government. Okay, so in law there is no term health emergency, administrative emergency, political. No, in law there is no such term. Only emergency.
So basically, there's only one emergency. There's no such thing as the others emergency here in our law.
Okay, that's right, Marsha. All right. So we have question from IIM students
Mm,
about the history of emergency, the case of Teh Cheng Ho
mm,
from Muhammad Fakhruddin bin Abdul Razak. I heard
mm,
that some of the lawyers challenged the decision of YDPA about the
mm,
declaration of emergency, whether to abide by the decision of PM, Prime Minister, or making in Raja Melayu decision. But
mm.
the lawyers not to challenge the decision of YDPA, but to make sure the Teh Cheng Ho case still relevant or not. Is it true, Prof?
Okay. So here we have, of course, an issue as to whether emergency is declared based on the discretionary power of Agong or must he act on advice. Okay. Now let us look at the situation. usually people will question, if emergency is proclaimed, can the proclamation be brought and questioned before the court? The answer is outright no. Why? Because Article 150, Clause 8 of the Federal Constitution, it oust, or in other words, it excludes jurisdiction of the court to hear any cases relating to the validity and continuance of proclamation of emergency. Okay, so that's number one, in relation to proclamation of emergency. Number two, some people question. I think, in fact, we know there are one lawyer who take the Agong to court, isn't it? That the thing is, we have to understand who actually needs emergency. The government. You know, the government advised Yang Tuan Agong to declare emergency. And then Agong had consulted the Conference of Rulers. After consultation, Conference of Rulers, actually not only Conference of Rulers, Agong also had called senior civil servant. You know, the from the security people, you know, the generals, and then the IGP and the deputy, director general, all people involved, and ask their opinion. Okay, personal, their opinion, their experience. After taking all this consideration, then Agong said that in his opinion, there is no need to declare emergency, sufficient the existing power. And the government of the day, which requested emergency, accepted the decision. Okay, so now the government is acting based on the decision of Agong. The government, I think our honorable Prime Minister said that now without emergency proclamation, we're going to continue to serve the people using the existing power. So there is no issue between the government and the Agong and Conference of Rulers. So why people who are not involved in the administration want to create problem? That is the issue, you know, because if the government has accepted the fact, now that's one thing, you know. Another thing is the acceptance of government of the decision of Agong not to declare emergency can be implied to mean that it is a discretionary power of Yang Tuan Agong or his prerogative. Okay, so this is an indication that could become a precedent, recognizing that the power is with Yang Tuan Agong. Now, some people ask, is it really necessary for Yang Tuan Agong to convene the Conference of Rulers in order to discuss whether or not to declare emergency? Okay, looking at the provision of Article 150. Now, in law, we have to read the provision. Okay, now I think AIKOL is very knowledgeable student in Islamic law. So he know that in Sharia, you cannot create hukum. The hukum must be based on certain evidence or dalil, isn't it? And then you need the usul fiqh, isn't it? It is Quran or Sunnah, there must be a dalil. We must know if it is based on Quran, which verse of the Quran. And then you have to interpret the Quran. We have to understand it, understand the asbabun nuzul, you know, and then the tafsir, and then the grammatical aspect, many aspects of the Quranic verse. Same as law. We need to look at the provision of the Constitution. Okay, the Constitution says when the Yang Tuan Agong is satisfied, it is his personal satisfaction. When it is personal satisfaction, it means his discretion. Okay, so it means that Yang Tuan Agong can decide based on his opinion. Although it is said Yang Tuan Agong decide based on his opinion, but in practice, Yang Tuan Agong not simply hear and straight away make decision. No, he's going to consult people, Attorney General, you know, lawyers, hear Conference of Rulers, who Yang Tuan Agong want to consult and confer. That is his discretion. So how he arrives is at discretion is his discretion. You know? So in other words, the Yang Tuan Agong can make decision on his own, or he can make decision after consulting other people. Here, I would like to acknowledge my thanks to the Yang Tuan Agong, who practice what we call shura in Islam, because he discussed with a lot of people, his brethren, and in fact, he take into consideration the opinion of the public who were really worried that emergency were to be proclaimed. So here we can see that Agong had tried to accommodate the wish of people from all walk of life before making decision. So that is basically the answer.
So,
Okay.
so
Continue.
basically, the Yang Tuan Agong, before arriving to his decision, would consult everyone that has experience with the proclamation of emergency itself.
Yeah.
Right, Doctor? So, um, on the refusal of the Yang Tuan Agong to declare it an emergency, in your opinion, so what are the most relevant steps needed to be taken by the government to curb our health and political issues right now?
Okay, the government basically have plan A, plan B, and in fact, plan C and plan D. So basically, when the prime minister and senior cabinet members met Yam Tanagong in his palace in Pekan Pahang, together with the senior civil servant, they basically had tabled their proposal. Now, what they have tabled, we were not informed. Okay, but definitely, the government of the day had some sort of standard that advise what they plan to do. Okay, what they plan to do. And of course, they also definitely have consulted Agong as to the probability of their advice are going to be accepted or not. And of course, government basically are not making decision spontaneously. They actually have preparation. Okay, so in fact, sometimes we also have plan A, plan B, plan C. So the thing is, the plan of government to use extraordinary power under Article 150 were not uh, assented to or were not accepted by the Yam Tanagong. Okay, that's fine. So now, what option uh, the government has? The answer is the option is to continue with the existing power. Okay, so now, of course, I cannot some sort of tell you exactly what the government is going to do, but what we can conclude is that the existing power can be used, but if there is a need to expand the power or to increase the power, uh, the government can amend the existing law so as to include or give more power to the authority to deal with the pandemic situation. And in fact, I think of yesterday or a few days ago, the Director General of the Health, Tan Sri, our Tan Sri DG, mentioned that actually they have proposed some amendment to the existing law in order to deal with this situation, taking into consideration emergency power is not going to be used. So that is basically the option that the government has to use the existing power to increase the effectiveness and efficiency of the current administration, and of course to propose government to amend uh, relevant law so as to increase the ability and power of the authorities in dealing with pandemic.
So basically, instead of declaring an emergency, we can now use our existing power and actually amend our laws instead of declaring an emergency in this current situation. So,
Yes. Okay. So the next okay. So if I'm not mistaken, that the decision to declare an emergency from our prime minister is because the increasing of the cases of COVID-19, and also the election that will be organized. But actually, we all can think that in this situation, any election or what we do not
cannot
we
execute.
execute or run it because we need to take care of our life first.
Mm,
All right. So even though the government do not declare the emergency,
mm,
we all the politician can think that the important to take care for our life first before the election. All right. Okay, Marsha, we continue to another question.
Okay.
I think okay, another question is
So basically,
Okay.
back then,
Sorry.
it seems that a proclamation of emergency is easily decided compared to um this one, the previous one where YDPA actually denied it. So why do you think that this is actually happening? Is it because our advanced administrative system, or is it like the increase of political literacy among our citizens?
Yes, I think there are many factors which cause the different treatment of emergency. I wrote a chapter in a book relating to federalism in Malaysia. You know, the title is uh, uh, Confusion, Coercion, and Compromise. So that is basically the way I see the stages our country had undergone. Now, first, when Malaysia was formed, we have problem to unite the country. This is a problem faced by many other countries, you know, because we want to establish unity. It is a newly born country. And then when the country was born, there were many people who were not happy with this country. So we have to look after this country. A lot of people want to some sort of cause disintegration of a country. So whether we like it or not, the government of back then during that day have to use some sort of force or coercion in order to preserve the integrity of our country. That is by the use of emergency. So that is why when look at the emergency was proclaimed in 1963, 1966, 1977, all these 1960s, 1970s, you know. During that time, we don't have internet, you know. In fact, I think they don't have radio, they don't have television, nothing, you know. So during that time it is difficult to some sort of to foster unity among the people, to communicate. So perhaps they have to use drastic measure and extraordinary power to deal with the problem back then. Nowadays, I think it's correctly mentioned by Marsha, we are different situation. Okay, during that time, there's not many learned people like you all. You know, there's no university in Malaysia during that time. Maybe UM only. Now there's a lot of university, a lot of learned people. We have technology. So how we deal with situation nowadays very different compared to those days. You know, and of course, we have a lot now of options, a lot of alternative, and perhaps we have to understand again our rulers, Malay rulers institution existed since 14th century. So meaning that it's continued to exist. So it is not like 100 years, no, for 500 years. So the knowledge transferred from one generation to another, from one ruler to another, from great grandfather. So those were passed to the current rulers, and the rulers managed to look after the country well. All right, they do not rule the country, but they want to look after the country. They don't govern, but they look after the country. So they want to preserve the integrity of the nation and want the people to be happy, you know. So then we have to understand the dynamics of democracy and the dynamics of monarchy in Malaysia. So I can see here we can use symbiosis, you know. So there is like a balance between the tradition and the need for modernity. So we want some modernity, but we want to preserve our belief. We want to preserve our tradition and culture, and want to look after people of all community of all religion in our nation. So, having said that, I think the way that we deal with current problem should be more consensual, inclusive, because we do not want only to have a country, but we want to have a country where everybody can live peacefully and happy, and there is no enmity. We want everybody to be able to make the most out of them. Uh, so we want to look after everybody for the whole nation. So that is why sometimes we have to set aside our political differences. We have to set aside our political affiliation, but we have to put the importance of the nation at the top of our hierarchy of priority.
So I guess that since the world has gone through modernity, there are several other factors that would affect our proclamation of emergency itself, right? So Faika? Yeah.
Okay. Doctor, we have another question from our audience. Muhammad Lutfil Hadi. He asked, after the proclamation of emergency, does YDPA can act on his own in declaring ordinance of emergency, or he is still subjected to the provision of Article 40 of Constitution?
Okay, so that's a question I think coming from a law student, because if he's not a law student, he will not know about the relevant provision, especially Article 40. Now, in Malaysia, we have a system of monarchy, but our system of monarchy is called constitutional monarchy. Constitutional monarchy means a monarch who is born by the constitution or under the constitution, the monarch or the king who act in accordance with the constitution. And our monarch, Alhamdulillah, so far act in accordance with the constitution and uphold the constitution. They are not acting above the constitution, and in fact, they preserve the integrity of the constitution. That is basically the function of our monarch. Our monarch, basic in general, act in accordance with advice. This is the importance of Article 40. Okay, in most cases, the Yang Tanagong or the Malay rulers act on advice of the elected government. However, there are some situations where the monarch or the rulers act on the advice of other institutions. For instance, in performing their function relating to clemency. You know, if people have committed crime and then they ask for pardon, there is pardon board. So here, usually the monarch act in accordance with the advice made by the pardons board. And then when it comes to Yam Tanagong, act on the advice of the Islamic Religious Council of State Not Having Rulers. Okay, and then there are also a few situations where the monarch act in his discretion. Now the question here is in relation to the power of the monarch or Yam Tanagong after the proclamation of emergency. Now the thing is, you see, Yam Tanagong is a person, is a good, respected person, but he is one person. You know, he is not a government. You cannot expect Yam Tanagong to draw an ordinance. You know, so ordinance or law are prepared. If you see, the process is very long, you know, in order to make law. So in reality, even if an ordinance were to be proclaimed by Yam Tanagong is not sit in his room and draw a bill or undang-undang. That doesn't make any sense, you know. It is the government of the day who usually is going to propose to Yam Tanagong, we should have this law, we should make that decision. So in reality, of course, it seems that Yam Tanagong in his name, Urusan Sri Paduka Baginda, but it doesn't mean that Agong is writing letter to you. Only the name of Agong is used, but it is the government who is behind that move. So what I can say under that circumstances is that we can expect that it is the government who advised Agong in performing his function. Okay, and of course, during that time, extreme hardship. Extreme hardship. Definitely, the government is going to use their ability to advise Agong to make a crucial decision during grave emergency.
So basically, only like the Agong itself, not only him that actually enact the laws, but it's under the also under the advice of the government and other people as well. So unfortunately, that was the last question for our session. I believe that we all have learned so much in this session. It's no longer 40 minutes of political knowledge, it's already an hour of political knowledge.
Yes.
So basically, we already know about the meaning of emergency itself, where there are three factors that we can declare emergency, but there are also other several factors as well. And Malaysia has already proclaimed like four emergencies, and also the YDPA does not enact the laws by himself, but under the advice of other people as
Yes,
well.
also a Prime Minister. All right, and that the concludes at the end for our session. So many thanks to our invited guest, Dr. Khairil Azmin, for
My
joining
pleasure.
us and lend your time to share your knowledge with all of us. And also thank you to our beloved audience that joining us from the start until now. And guys, stay tuned. See you in the next episode on IIUMTV in Political Insights. 40 minutes
of
of
political
political
knowledge.
knowledge. Okay, bye. Assalamualaikum.
Thank you.
Assalamualaikum.